After 4 years, the House Oversight Subcommittee on the coronavirus has finally wrapped up its investigation into the origins of the pandemic. And one of the big takeaways, they found that the virus has biological traits that don't naturally occur in nature. Watch.
The Select Subcommittee's finding that a lab leak is the most likely origin scenario, that the Chinese Communist Party was conducting dangerous research, and this type of dangerous research was notionally supported by the NIH.
Glad we can actually say that out loud right now. Here to break it all down for us is Matthew Peterson, editor-in-chief of Blaze News, and conservative review host Daniel Horowitz. Daniel, when we saw this story, we knew we had to come to you. So what are some of your main takeaways from this report?
Well, this was the most Republican report ever. I mean, what Republicans typically do is when the ball is in play, they're on the wrong side of it, tossing an interception. Then when the play is no longer in contention, they're righteous on that play at the expense of the one in front of you. So 4 years later, it was a lab leak. I mean, yeah, we kind of knew that. We didn't need 2 years of a creation of an entire subcommittee to determine that. And in fact, what they are doing is distracting based on what they didn't talk about, or where they did talk about was a problem, and that's the vaccines. When the issue was lockdowns, they were nowhere to be seen to help us. They passed the trillions of dollars that bankrupt us to this day, and it's getting worse. We begged and begged the Republican governors and legislatures and congressmen. They were horrible on the issue. Then when we already exposed that, by the way, 4.5 years ago, and then 3 years ago it was universal. The issue was masking. They were supporting that, and they were nowhere to be seen. And then when the issue became the vaccine themselves, then finally they were willing to admit, and in the report they did admit that the masking was a hoax and obviously not scientifically grounded. But when it got to the vaccines, they call it a medical novelty and miracle, and their only issue is that Trump didn't get enough credit for it, which was just a bunch of political rhetoric in a finding like that, which was very bizarre. If you do a word search in the 520-page document, there is not a word about remdesivir. And the reason why that's important, juxtaposed to the vaccine, is these are things that demonstrate not failure of public health or misinformation or negligence, but willful malfeasance. It was known from day one that remdesivir was a deadly drug, and it had to be pulled from the Ebola trial in Africa, and that's a pretty deadly disease. So it has to be a really deadly treatment, and it was chosen as treatment even after it was causing kidney failure, which was known from day one. That does not make an appearance in there. What is needed now is not to say, it was a lab leak. The U.S. is funding and has multiple locations in Africa and the former Soviet satellites that are engaging in gain-of-function research. Now, Wuhan is a distraction. And gain-of-function is not something separate from vaccine, but that is part and parcel of the vaccine industry. That is part of the ideology. So it's kind of like, when someone points to the moon, the idiot focuses on the finger. The point is not the Wuhan lab and the lab leak. It's a lot worse than that, and it's the vaccines. What we really need is an investigation using all of the data we have, all the access they have to medical billing and Medicare, Medicaid data, showing correlation between the rise in cancers, understanding the treatment for it, understanding the root of gain-of-function research for all vaccination, so we can finally get to the truth of which vaccines are needed, which ones aren't, which ones are a problem. That's what civilization needs right now.
Yeah, and Daniel, you posted on X, and you were highlighting the committee's praise of the COVID vaccine as an incredible feat of science. Marjorie Taylor Greene came out and disagreed with this sentiment. Take a look.
What this committee failed to do, and what I'm very upset about, was to address the vaccines. And this is the elephant in the room. This is the major issue that the American people really wanted to see the COVID-19 subcommittees or COVID Select Committee truly investigate.
Daniel, your response.
When the committee began, so January 2023, We already had the Cleveland Clinic study showing negative efficacy. We had theirs, VSafe, European medical agencies, Pfizer confidential documents that were secured through lawsuits that showed a wealth of data that this thing attacks every single organ system imaginable. I mean, the thousands of academic studies, case studies. And again, I want to highlight just the VSafe, which is CDC's pharmacovigilance program that showed a 7.7% rate of clinical level injury from people who directly reported back them with texts that are now becoming available of people crying out to CDC about all the painful things. It is downright subversion for Republicans to have put this out and have engaged in this process for 2 years and wouldn't even embark on what is out in the open. It's so obvious. I don't even cover it anymore on my show. We need to go on to the next vaccines and understand what's going on there. All I could say is that this just underscores the need to really work with the incoming HHS to try to do righteous things, because it's not going to come from Congress.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because I completely agree. I mean, we just went through how spineless Congress is. Oh, yay, you said some true things. That's sort of my feeling about it. But we have hope, I think serious hope here, and I want to know what you think, because Trump recently picks Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, right, to lead the National Institute of Health. This is someone who would not mess around, I think, with many of these issues, and who knows a lot about what the shenanigans that have gone on in the last 4 years. So what are your thoughts about him taking over?
So I think what a lot of people need to understand, NIH, what they particularly do is fund treatments, fund research behind treatments. And this is a pro-life issue. What we learned from COVID is that you will have a government scientific industrial complex that will literally stifle research on promising treatments while pushing harmful treatments. Now, on the former part of it, to their credit, they did touch on a little bit here and there the censorship of ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine. It was a small piece of it, but they did touch on it in the report. What Dr. Bhattacharya could bring to the table is what I would say is the triage now. If you're doing triage, what does civilization need? We don't need the case against lockdowns and school closures. I mean, we won that already. That's unfortunately the harm was done and the lessons are learned. What we need is there are people that are suffering a lot of ailments. There is a crisis level of exploding cancers. There's no doubt that there's an element of it associated with the vaccines. There's clearly a part of it that's just generational also, whether it's the water or the food. We need to get to the bottom of that. And that's part of what CDC needs to be doing. But particularly Dr. J at NIH, all these off-label broad spectrum anti-inflammatories, antifungal, anti-parasitic drugs that some of these doctors who are very right on COVID are saying work for cancer, rather than shoveling millions upon billions of dollars. We spend tens of billions of dollars each year for the National Cancer Center, which is also would be under his auspices, on these expensive, very dangerous treatments for big pharma. We need to look at off-patent drugs where there's no money to be made. This is what you need public funding for, to get entrepreneuring scientists that are just in it for the love of saving lives, and finally get to the bottom of, does menbendazole, ivermectin, things like that, low-dose naltrexone, which is used for drug overdoses. There's a lot of talk about this stuff. We need funding behind that, diverted away from the cartel.
Daniel Horowitz, great as always. Thanks so much for joining us.
See you later.
And Matthew, it's interesting listening to that conversation with Daniel, because of course he knows everything about it, right? He's going to forget more than we'll ever learn about coronavirus and the vaccine. But as we're going through that, I'm thinking, we're on YouTube. Still 4 years later, Is this going to be allowed to be put up there tonight, right? Well, let us know in the comments, I guess.
Yeah, no, this is a serious question, what Jill's talking about. I mean, you still, if you're in this industry at all, have to worry about being demonetized every day. And, that's one of the many very serious fallouts of, even when he was saying we already know school closures and all these things are bad, it's like, that's true. We do. I mean, how many people is the lesson really learned? Who's really repented? So I'm glad we're getting a little bit of a reason, but we need a lot more.